Hi and welcome back to another video, this time again on SoundBridge. I want to cover a topic that I haven't seen covered on YouTube at all related to SoundBridge, and that's how to handle multiple output instruments. For example, a drum plugin where you want to be able to separate the individual kick, snare, hi-hat, and the toms into separate tracks on the mixer. So you have more control, you can add plugins and things like that, or multiple output instrument plugins like Contact. How would you actually route those? Doesn't look like there's a feature, but there is, and it's pretty simple. Not only that, you can record the output of those if you want to convert what you're doing into audio. And so I'm going to demonstrate that in this video using a drum plugin called Handy Drums by Gorin Grooves. I saw this company at NAMM in the early part of this year. I thought it was a really simple, clean layout on these plugins. They sound really clean, and so super simple user interface. I put together a track that includes bass, guitar, and the drums, and I'll play a little bit of that just so you can get an idea. In the programming, all we have are kick, snare, and hi-hats. So the idea is to separate it out into those three channels. And right now, if we look at the mixer, which I'll load here at the bottom, I hit 2 to open the bottom panel here, and there's a button here for mixer. It gives me kind of a smaller version of the mixer. So we just hit that plus so you could see them, and then those are our channels. So what I'm going to do is create 3 new audio channels, and these will be stereo audio channels. And then I'll hit plus, and I'll call the first one kick and create, and it wound up here. And rather than create it, we'll just duplicate it using Command D 2 more times, and then rename this to snare, and rename this one to HH for hi-hat. On our drum plugin, there's always a feature that allows you to route to multiple outputs if that plugin supports multiple outputs. And you can see in Handy Drums, if I click on this page here, it allows me to do that routing. Now I'm going to route nothing to the original stereo. That would be the track that the MIDI instrument is on itself. So we're going to move that from stereo 1 to stereo 2. Then we'll move the snare to stereo 3 and these hi-hats to stereo 4. The rest don't matter. They're not playing in this situation. I want to keep the example simple. So then back on our new tracks, right here is where you select the input. So the input to the kick track, we want to do internal. Here's our track 3 drums MIDI Gorin Handy Grooves Studio Standard. And we're not going to pick up 1, 2, but we're going to pick up 3, 4, which is the second pair. So we'll do 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8 for these new tracks. So then on the snare track, internal, track 3, and now we'll go up to 5, 6, which should be essentially our third channel here. And then on this one, internal, and then 7, 8. Now if we play back, we don't hear any drums at all, and that's because we have to monitor the input for those tracks with this icon here. So if we turn these on, we now have our multi-track drums set up. Next thing to do is probably put this in some kind of bus, which you do with grouping, is to select all 4 of those, hit group, and then this group, just call that drum bus. And that's how you handle the multi-track drums. So one reason to separate out the drums into separate channels, or any multi-out instrument into separate channels, is because you might want to process and mix, pan, and do things with those separately. So on the snare channel here, you could add something like a compressor. So let's add a DBX 160. We just drop it on the snare channel, and then we can turn that on and then try to find a sound that we like. DBX 160 makes the snare a lot more punchy, gives it that kind of sustain and crunch, which is really, really fun. Now, another thing we can do with this, besides mixing, is we can record those right onto these tracks by just hitting record here. I'll back up, go into record mode, and then I can just take the output of that and record these into audio. I can disable these. You can also disable these by just hitting Command and hitting any one of them. On the MIDI track, I'll just mute that. And because I had applied the effects to the snare track, if I turn that off, you'll hear that the effects were not recorded. Anyway, I thought that was really interesting. I discovered that today. You do this by doing an internal routing by setting the input to the track using internal and then picking up what's already there. This is the output of the track or of the instrument, and then you can see you could pick all of the multiple output pairs are available there. And that's the setup for multiple output instruments. I hope you find this helpful. I'll see you in another video very soon.